We're joined now by Stephanie Peatling, a senior writer at Fairfax and blogger extraordinaire. In fact, the author behind the daily political blog The Pulse that gives real-time coverage of politics each day that Parliament sits. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Chris.
Looking back, you cover in minute detail all the little comings and goings, a lot of the personal quirks, whatever, of politics as it happens. But looking back over this year, what do you think the highlights have been?
Well, I think the government would say it's done a lot. It's had a year of delivery and achievement. It's stopped the boats. It's repealed the carbon tax. So I think those are undoubtedly big things for the government. But for me, I think the highlights of the year was the G20 summit, or having all those world leaders here, watching how the Prime Minister performed on the stage with those people and not doing a very good job of it, let's face up to that. And I think also just the narrative of the way the year has unfolded. I know that sounds really wanky, but the first year of the Abbott government, who really would have thought that it would have gone from such a position of strength at the start of the year to finishing the year in such a kind of case of woeful shambles, you know, policies being discarded but not being discarded very effectively, ministers cranky with each other and with the Prime Minister. You know, this is not a position that a government wants to be in at the end of its first year.
Now, many people can still consume their news. They get the nightly news bulletin or the newspaper in the morning, and so they see more the end results. But you, in your coverage, you see it sort of unfolding, the to and fro, etc. Your view of the government, how it's operated, you have this sense that it's not that well structured. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting vantage points that someone like me has, which is being able to watch politics, you know, in minute-by-minute blocks, basically, which some people would not find appetising, which I find really interesting. And so if we look, for example, at the attempt by the Prime Minister in the second last week of Parliament to ditch the GP co-payment. So first thing in the morning, I'm reading a story by Mark Kenny and writing about, oh, yes, the PMO has decided that this is going, and yet half an hour later, we've got one minister, the health minister, in fact, not really seeming to know that this was the case, or if he did know it was the case, you know, not being able to say that, followed by the Treasurer. And, or, you know, you watch through the day the way that the government basically had no control over how this story played out, which then started, of course, the story, which was how they didn't really know what they were doing about it in the first place. And then that was the story that people read the next morning or on the nightly news. But as you say, you're able to watch that in little tiny chunks come out piece by piece. And as each one comes out, you kind of go, oh, yeah, right, this is how this jigsaw puzzle is coming together. And so I guess I have each piece of the puzzle one by one, and then at the end of the day, hopefully, there's a complete picture that people can look at.
So every day you come in, you're writing a story, but you've got no idea really. You know what the beginning is, but you don't know what the middle and end is.
Which is great.
One of the fascinating things to watch, I guess, this year, and particularly since the new Senate has come into place, has been the ongoing soap opera, if you like, of the Senate crossbenchers. What do you make of that, and what sort of story is it, do you think?
I love the Senate. I mean, I think it's such a great institution, and I love that people have put in this kind of raggle-taggle bag of gypsies and what have you that have just come in here. And I think what strikes me as interesting is not so much the kind of machinations about who's going to support who and what have you, although that is interesting, but I think the public's reaction to that is quite interesting. And so when I'm on the blog and people are commenting and so on, you have a lot of people saying, oh, you know, Senator Lambie or Senator Muir, what do they know about politics? They're an idiot and what have you. And you think, well, it is the people's house and people voted for them, and we have these people in here, and we talk about how we don't want career politicians and professional politicians, and yet when you put so-called ordinary people in there, the backlash against them is quite extraordinary.
It is interesting though, because most news is confined just for space reasons or time reasons to the serious policy issues. The blog gives you more time though to explore, one, the personalities of the people involved, and also the sort of sense of humour that can pervade this place, and at times, I guess, the sense of the absurd. Are there any particular events during the year that really come to mind as sort of showing the sort of humour and the weirdness of the place at times?
Yeah, I prefer to think of it as the humanity of the place.
Yes.
But there was an incident a few weeks ago when there was a division that was called in the House of Representatives, and so everybody raced in, and Sarah Henderson, who's a new government House of Reps member, had a takeaway coffee cup. You know, it was 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and she'd obviously needed her coffee, and so she raced in with her cup of
There's usually
coffee.
about a dozen on this set.
That's right, that's right. But she didn't realise that, or she forgot that you weren't supposed to have hot beverages in there. You're not supposed to take any food or drink into the House of Representatives. And so what happened? Well, she was spotted by the opposition that tried to make a point of order about this. And so Christopher Pyne, the Education Minister, took her coffee cup and hid it behind his boots, hopefully out of sight of the Speaker, Bronwyn Bishop, and just kind of kept it there. And the opposition made a big point about this, and Bronwyn Bishop, you know, chastised her a little bit. And then really at the end of the day, I mean, it was pretty entertaining and funny for 5 minutes, but here's this kind of idea of this poor stressed person who has a very demanding job, really, really wanted their coffee, you know, just for 5 or 10 minutes, and it's interrupted. They can't even take it with them to do their job, wouldn't have distracted them. And then you have a senior government minister basically covering up for her at the same time as the opposition is seeking to make some great dramatic political point about it.
You talk about the humanity, it sounds more like the inhumanity.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
I remember that, and you told it so well, and part of telling it so well is the photographers,
That's
the Fairfax photographers, that can cover that sort of issue in a way, you know, that really there's not the time or space in you know, the newspapers or whatever, or not nearly so much. One of the things you alluded to there, though, too, is the response from people. That's one of the good things about the blog, isn't it? That it's a two-way conversation.
It is, absolutely. And look, I have to confess to all the people out there who read the blog, we do love you. I don't actually moderate the comments. I have someone else to do it, but I do read them throughout the day. And I think what's fantastic about it is it allows people who are really interested and passionate about politics to come in and have their own discussion. And a lot of the time they're not responding particularly to particular issues or points, but they're taking something that started off on the morning, like, you know, the GP co-payment or the, you know, the budget or whatever it is, but they then go off on their own little path and they talk about, you know, policy ideas or who they like and who they don't like. And it's a really interesting way of tracking what a certain group of people, albeit one who are very interested in politics, how they react to policies and how they react to the personalities in politics. And so it's quite interesting having your own kind of little focus group in some ways.
So how is that sort of altered in any way the way you see politics or the way you report politics?
It has a little bit. I think for me, I really like the immediacy of it. I like that people can ask me questions and I like that I can respond to them. And where it's really good for me is when I've used some kind of jargon probably to describe what's going on in the Senate, because no one really understands how the Senate works. And I'll say, oh, you know, here we are, this is a photo of the second committee vote or something, and someone will, you know, rightly point out and say, we don't actually know what that means. Like, does that mean they're actually voting on the legislation, or is this just a point? And I'll be reminded that I have not really done my job because I haven't explained to people adequately what is going on. So I like that. I like that people ask me stuff or pick me up on stuff, or people will come back to me and go, didn't really like your coverage of question time today. It was too, you know, it was too immature and joke driven. You know, we want more of the substance of the questions and so on. And I'll have a think about it and look back on it. And sometimes I'll think, yeah, that's warranted, or sometimes I'll think no. But I do take big notice of it. And yeah, it's really changed the way I have a look at stuff.
Now, it's often said that journalism is, you know, the first take of history. Well, I guess the blog is the first take of the first take. The draft of the first take.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to next year, what are you looking for? What are you looking forward to? What are you really interested in seeing how things develop?
Well, I think how the government manages next year is going to be crucial, obviously. They're not ending the year on a good note. They've got a lot of kind of things to deal with in a policy sense that are not popular. They've got a lot of internal shenanigans going on, and I think this summer if they're smart, they need to sit down and have a look at their strategy, have a look at what they want to do, and get themselves back on track, because at this point they're not in an election-winning position. Now we're 2 years away from an election. If we went to an election this weekend, would anyone really be voting for the Labor Party? I'm not so sure about that. And this is the other side of the story, of course, is that while Labor is doing very well, at the expense of the government, they're not really offering any alternative policies or visions. And I think next year we will move in, as we come towards the end of the year, towards that phase where people start saying, okay, what have you got to offer me? How are you actually going to be different to the government? And the pressure will then be on Labor to start articulating some of those alternative ideas.
Okay, Stephanie Peatling, we look forward to your moment-by-moment coverage of politics in 2015.
Thanks, Chris.